I've really enjoyed the discussions over the last few weeks in relationship to this. And I'm enjoying seeing what people are hearing from the people that they talk to about climate change. And I have a few comments about that in a few minutes. But one of the things I just wanted to point out, it is noted, I think it was slide 12, from the Sociology of Climate Change PowerPoint. That was the I think week 5 that we did the first portion of chapter 3. And what's important to note here is that since the time that this book was, the sixth edition was published, it came out in 2017. It was the end of 2016 that the very last updates, and there weren't many that could even be done at that point, were completed. So when it comes to this chapter, there was a lot of things in there like this could happen, and we don't know the pace at how things are going to progress, and basically, impacts have accelerated and they continue to accelerate, and the warming trend continues on that pretty steep path, so that by this year, we find that 2016 and 2020 are basically tied for the hottest year on the record. Um, it is also noted the World Meteorological Organization, said that this was a report that came out in January, that there is a 1 in 5 chance that the average global temperature will at least temporarily exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2024, and that's above those pre-industrial levels. And remember, the 1.5 degrees Celsius is where the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has landed. So for the sixth edition of this book, I was drawing on the IPCC report of 2014, because those big reports come out every 4 years. And this was a special report, regardless. So it was this in 2018. They came down on, not only do we need to keep it well below 2 degrees Celsius, we really need to shoot for the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal, to avoid some of the worst environmental and economic impacts that are happening now, but are expected to get worse, with a 5. If we go above the 1.5 degrees Celsius benchmark. So that is the target, that is the report that, for example, the new Green New Deal was drawing on. So it's just important to keep that in mind. The other thing I just wanted to emphasize, many people, doing great, talking about, sociology's contribution to understanding climate change. Um, One of the things, that discussion in the book was also coupled with was a sort of critique of how the social sciences, including sociology, has been brought into research on climate change and on planning on how to address climate change. And so, importantly, one of the things that was noted, and some people noted in their papers, which was great, is that more critical theories like political economy theories are left out, or have been left out of much of the science that has been done for these big reports that then inform decision makers on what to do. And, political economy theories like the treadmill of production, um, uh, researchers possibly have shied away from them because they may actually challenge vested interest. And, like according to the dominant social paradigm, those unquestioned, uh, you know, um, institutions of our modern society, like capitalism, for example. So, if individuals, groups, organizations are identified as culprits or contributors to climate change, that can create some discomfort. It can also create some difficulties, and that then, um, those who are trying to address climate change have to kind of go against those vested interests and challenge them, and they may not want to make changes, or if they're willing to make changes, they might want to make less aggressive changes because they have a vested interest in the status quo. So that's one possible reason. Another is, I think, related to the third point here, which is that a lot of the research that's been done has been sort of depoliticalized, um, since disproportionately the scientists involved in climate change research have been from the physical and natural sciences. um, they tend to want to shy away from um, research that seems on the surface to be political, because it is, identifying economic systems, it's identifying political systems, and in doing so, we know that those are indeed political issues when it comes to, our debates within governments around the world and in our communities. So they're taught to be, value neutral. They shouldn't, like be partisan. And no, they should not. Absolutely not. But political institutions are social structures, and social structures are what sociologists and other social scientists as well sometimes, but definitely sociologists. That's what we do. That's what we study, and it's social structures that shape our interactions um, at various levels in which we live our lives, at the local, within our communities, within our states, our provinces, regions, nations, as global citizens. So it'd be kind of like a, physical scientist, or a medical, somebody studying medicine, thinking they couldn't study an organ of the body for some reason, uh, because it was like a political hot button or something. And you just, that's not, you're not going to be doing good science if you cannot look at the full picture and every piece of it that is relevant. So that doesn't mean that like theories like the treadmill of production hold all the answers. They certainly do not. But the concern is we don't want to be taking off the table theories and research that they help to guide, because they're perceived to be political, or because they're perceived to potentially that they'll instigate conflict. That's not going to help anyone. At the same time, we don't have to consider every theory. A theory is only useful if it helps to guide us to understand conditions, gather evidence about them, to answer relevant questions and address relevant problems. If they don't do that, we don't have, we don't have to pay attention to them. So, but theories like the treadmill production have been shown that they can offer some relevant insights. So maybe we wouldn't want to totally throw them out. So that's one of the aspects to look at. And one of the reasons I point that out, some of you did a great job in noting this, is that it is a contribution of sociology, is to try to understand social structures and to ask critical questions about them, including our economic system, our political system, all our social systems or institutions. So, and oftentimes, sociologists are assumed, are labeled liberals because, in part, that is because of what we do and what we look at, gets equated with the way our political system is set up in the United States. And those things can be connected, but they're also very, very different, very different. So what does sociology have to offer? I think what is key here, and again, many great answers. This is not the only thing, but really understanding variations of experience and how individuals, social groups, organizations, how uh, that there is variance in what people are going to experience when it comes to, for example, climate change impacts, and how organizations are structured, institutions are structured at different levels. Again, local, community, state, regional, national, international. Um, that they don't have to all be organized exactly the same way. In fact, they probably shouldn't be, to some degree. You need to. Uh, we may need to increasingly uh, be more cognizant of structuring our organizations in ways that are going to be more adaptable to the environmental and climate conditions of specific places. And organizations, institutions, how they're organized, can produce better or worse outcomes. For example, Texas is a great example. The one state that is not connected to the national grids, the one state, in doing so to avoid those regulations. Um, and you can see, that has produced some different outcomes for Texans than for other people who were also experiencing in other states that cold snap. So, looking at the organization um, of the energy system and how that's connected to also the political system of a state like Texas is really important to figuring out mitigation and adaptation. So remember, mitigation is about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, getting to that zero carbon future. Adaptation is figuring out how we're going to live with current and expected impacts. So the other thing just I wanted to note with this slide is that one of the questions that was asked at Cape Marble, was asked of Sal Griffiths in the podcast for this week, is, what do you think about the individual versus collective solutions? And nobody wants to take individuals out of the picture, but, um, I think the general consensus is we need collective action and we need social change beyond us as individuals. And the sort of the good news of that is that not everybody has to be on board. Not everybody has to be supportive of the changes that could be put into place to address climate change and related social problems. But if you have enough people on board that you can actually change the social conditions, change the social structures, so that those, that different how to's can be easily uh, done by people and even find that they may enjoy them, you can get to where you need to be. But for the last several decades, really the focus has been on individual change, and that's in part been mirrored in the energy, the way we've looked at energy since the 1970s, which is looking at it through the lens of efficiency. And again, not that efficiency isn't something that we want to achieve, but we efficiency within a system that produces carbon is what is not going to get us where we need to be. So we need to transform, the energy system, move beyond just the individual, also efficiency frame. It's just sort of related to the idea, how is recycling related to climate change? So people noted recycling in their post, which I think is great. I'm totally pro recycling, but do keep in mind, recycling is a very individual, oftentimes, although it can be structured at larger levels, response to to having a positive impact on the environment and reducing environmental harms such as plastics in the oceans. To some people, even see it as connected to reducing um, carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. And the problem with recycling is that it is the last of the R's. So keep that in mind. Reduce, reuse, recycle. And it's the last of the R's because, in our current system, energy system, it is going to it's going to utilize a lot of carbon intensive energy. So, particularly in transporting from collection to then where the materials might be actually recycled. And sometimes that's very, very long distances. So it can really produce a big carbon footprint, in addition to the fact that once you get those materials to a place that they can be dematerialized and then repurposed, you are again using energy in a system that remains carbon intensive, and you are um, also oftentimes emitting other toxins in the process. So recycling is good, but we probably want to take it out of the number of our top category of things that we can do. Not that we don't want to do it, but also think of other things we can do um, to reduce. We'll get into talking about ecological footprint in chapter 6, our ecological footprint, but also our carbon footprint. Um, so, uh, you know, that's super important. And then this slide also, I think, touches on a little bit Kari Norgaard's work. Her work is, going back to you could go back to the slide, one of the things she actually points out is that it is at the micro level. So she's looking at individuals and how individuals are responding to the condition of climate change, but she's doing it through a sociological lens, and how those emotions that we all experience, but how we experience them, what becomes acceptable to acknowledge that we are feeling and to express is collectively socially organized. So emotion norms, the emotion might be fear, a sense of insecurity, a sense of helplessness. The norm is, how do I manage that? How do I make sense of that? And so, really interesting, the interviews that she all had. One of the things is, I've had students do this in the past with in other classes, the same exercise, and it seems to be a repeated theme that comes up a lot, are people who do not deny climate change. So is that implicatory? The type of denial that she was looking at, they're not denying it, but they aren't really doing much about it. And they say things like, I just don't know enough, right? Some people are even sometimes stuck between how much or what to believe about it, right? So they don't, and again, I just don't know enough. I'm not knowledgeable enough. I don't know what to do. So, is that an accepted norm within our society to feel like, well, if I don't have all the information, or if I'm not an expert, I really can't do anything? I hear this sometimes with people when they talk about, for example, voting, and they'll say things like, well, I can't really do that because I don't know enough. I don't have an opinion, right? And is that an acceptable norm that kind of allows a person to opt out of taking action? And of course, people interviewed people who do not believe it's real, who think it's fake news. And I say, of course, because that is something that is more prevalent, for example, in the United States than in Norway. Um, and I think that it's interesting. One, a distrust of science, is that an emotion norm, right? So that it is acceptable in our society and culture to distrust science, to distrust experts. And I don't think that is acceptable so much in Norway, and that wasn't. But that's not how people in Norway are responding to climate change. But it does seem to be culturally acceptable in the United States. On top of that, then is it's acceptable to say I think it's fake, I don't trust, I don't trust the science, or both sides produce fake data, whatever. But then it allows for a sort of a selective attention, like I don't have to pay any attention to this at all, I can completely tune it out, because it's just fake. So, and that might be a reaction to, uh, you know, a sense of, what's the emotion that's a response to? Is it fear? Is it insecurity? Is it helplessness? That's the thing to consider. So, the other thing I wanted people to think about, really, and I try to kind of get at it a little bit with this week's discussion, is people who are doing some things. So some of you interviewed people who, they try to give to organizations, they work in the conservation field, they want to, that they follow the how information about climate change is coming out and want to be active, or trying to be active, um, in response to climate change. Uh, so these people still have emotions. We all have emotions, right? And I think I don't think people, I have a hard time, I guess, believing that people who believe climate change is real and actually want to do something about it don't also feel some fear, a sense of insecurity about what might happen. But what they may feel a little less is a sense of helplessness. I don't know. That's something to think about, because they're drawing on different norms to manage at least the emotions of fear and insecurity. And do drawing on those norms help them to maybe cope with a sense of helplessness? And what would those norms be? And one that just struck me in reading one of the posts was maybe a norm that exists in the United States, of that it's our responsibility to take action. And I think there's different ways this can be looked at. But one way it could be looked at as historically, Americans have seen themselves as world leaders, right? That the globe looks to us to lead, um, and that we have led on really big issues. And this is one of the things that Sal Griffiths talks about, right? We have been global leaders on big issues, and people have looked at us to do this, and it has given us a sense of pride. I think about my grandparents who were, um, young people in the Depression era, but they also had a lot of pride in coming out of that era, and actually a lot of pride in the New Deal that came out of that era, and a lot of pride, um, and a sense of, they endured something, but they didn't let it take them down. They survived it, and things were done about it. It was addressed. So that sense of leadership and responsibility, could that be a positive norm that could be drawn on to create collective action on doing something about climate change? You could also look at responsibility in terms of, the United States. We've been one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions historically, and remain a huge contributor to this day. So, does that also mean that morally we have the responsibility to lead? And that's the right thing to do. So, there's also a moral or ethical compass that could be drawn upon. Historically, the United States believed in equality, at least equality of opportunity. So, by addressing climate change, can we also uplift those values of equality so that more people can enjoy in the life that we think Americans ought to be able to live? It should be a good life. Um, so not a life of fear and insecurity and expecting that we're going to have to go for periods of time where we won't be able to rely on our energy to have our homes heated, that that shouldn't have, that doesn't have to happen, doesn't have to be. We don't have to, be be sort of victim to these sorts of circumstances. So that's really important. And looking forward to this last discussion and how you'll handle that. Last thing I wanted to mention, and I'll wrap it up, is Montreal Protocol. This is from the slide on Green Diplomacy. Super positive in that we see there is this international example where world leaders came together in opposition or in the face of industry opposition. There was less of a scientific consensus than there is now about climate change. And they went, their decision making was based on what some would call a precautionary principle. We know enough, and we know enough that the risks are concerning enough. Can we guarantee they're all going to happen? No, but it's risky enough, and the evidence is good enough that we need to. We're going to need to do something different, and they did it. Now, has it been perfect? No. Is there still problems that that continue need to be fleshed out? Absolutely. The same thing will happen with climate change. And how we respond to it. And if we were to take some big transformative change, it's not going to create a utopia. There'll be ongoing issues that we will have to address and adjust to, and adaptation and mitigation. We'll be coming back to concepts like ecological and equal exchange in future chapters, a lot of this stuff. But I wanted to emphasize that, we just got back into the Paris Agreement that stopped taking those initial pledges we made on voluntary reductions. Um, you know, the Trump administration did not want to adhere to those, but we're going to go back to those now. Regardless, it doesn't really, I mean, it matters, but what we know today is that those voluntary reductions that we said we were going to do, that we pledged at that time, are not going to be enough. This is not going to be enough. We're going to have to be more aggressive. We're going to have to be more aggressive. And that's where you have, what the Paris Agreement had in there was that ability to ratchet, for countries to ratchet it up. But to ratchet it up is going to take some pressure from civil society, and that's pressure from the people of different places throughout the world to pressure their political leaders to ratchet up, let them know this is what we want. We need to do something about climate change. And as we do that, we could also be creating a better life for all of us. And so, one of the things that people noted was the Green New Deal seems rather, like it seems a bit like a dream. And that's absolutely a fair um, uh, description of it, possibly. I mean, argue it's idealistic, it's visionary, doesn't have enough specifics. Sure, absolutely. It was written to be a more of a map, right? Or written to be more of a vision. Um, that the pieces are going to have to be worked on, and as we begin to tackle it. But it was really the idea of, can we commit to doing something big, something transformative? And I think about, particularly with Sal Griffiths talking this week, the analogy, to what we did with the New Deal in the uh, early and mid 20th century, and all the big new policies that were put into place that transform people's lives, like my grandparents, in ways that, sometimes when I reflect upon it, is pretty remarkable. But that time, the idea of the American dream that we take for granted today, and some people argue it's dead, whatever. But that idea of the American dream um, really came out, it really was popularized in the 1930s. And it was, it was a dream, but it meant that people had a story. They had something that they could aspire to, and not only individually but collectively. And I think that's one of the messages that is being sent is we need something to aspire to. um, we need something, new story. And you know um, and and can that story be one of being able to live in a more secure environment, in a more secure social environment, so natural and social environment. All right, this has gotten way too long. It's longer than I wanted it to be. But I think I got some things clarified that needed to be. Take good care. We'll see you in another video sometime soon. So stop, share, and